London's Lord Chief Justice opened his court early one July morning in 1932. He was bending to a discreet order from the King himself. The matter was urgent and very salacious. Rumour had it a glamorous countess, rich, restless and royal adjacent, had been caught in a lover's embrace simply too shocking for Fleet Street. The bubbling whispers were of a dazzling cabaret singer, of a notorious and outrageous diamond-studded gift, of a secret so explosive it rattled the palace walls. The truth, when it emerged behind closed doors, would prove even more outrageous than the gossip. Welcome to Society Mysteries. Edwina Cynthia Annette Ashley was born in 1901 into privilege. Her mother died when Edwina was just 10, and the lonely girl was shuttled off to boarding school she despised. Bullied for her German Jewish grandfather's fortune, ethnicity, and fame, she later called her school years sheer hell. Salvation came in the form of that very grandfather, the magnate Sir Ernest Cassel. Sir Ernest was one of the richest men in Europe and friend to King Edward VII. Cassel adored Edwina. He whisked his favourite granddaughter out of school and into high society, letting her play hostess at his palatial London mansion, Brook House. She had inherited not just Cassel's millions, but his flair for grandeur, and an appetite for adventure that would soon set those staid drawing rooms aquiver with scandal after scandal. At a glittering London ball in 1920, Edwina's path crossed that of Lord Louis Dicky Mountbatten, a dashing young naval officer with impeccable royal connections. 2 years later, on July 18, 1922, Edwina Ashley became Lady Louis Mountbatten in what newspapers hailed as the wedding of the year. Society rejoiced at this apparent union of beauty, nobility, and fabulous wealth, a real-life fairy tale. The newlyweds basked in the limelight, even larking about in a home movie with a rather surprising cameo by Charlie Chaplin during their honeymoon. If appearances were to be believed, Edwina had found her perfect prince and a storybook life to match. Yet behind the castle walls, Edwina wasn't all that happy in her role. She felt relegated to the part of pretty young wife, while Dicky's royal ambitions took centre stage. Edwina, however, had never been one for sitting still. So this convent-schooled society bride did the unthinkable. She rebelled, and spectacularly so, but not before becoming pregnant. In 1924, Edwina gave birth to a daughter, Patricia, only to promptly dash off to the Riviera with one of her paramours soon after. Patricia would not see much of her mother after that, and nor would her younger daughter Pamela, who bluntly remembered, "Mummy was not interested in babies." In one notorious incident, Edwina parked her children and their governess in a Budapest hotel during a political crisis, then forgot which hotel it was, requiring a small rescue operation. The extravagant parties of the roaring 20s beckoned louder than nursery lullabies or maternal instincts. Such was the young Countess Mountbatten's approach to parenting, more flapper than mother. Exotic travels became her calling card. 1 month she might be motoring through Guatemala or trekking to Machu Picchu, the next sipping champagne in a Maharaja's palace. Anything but the ordinary, and wherever she went, Tatler and the Times society pages would have a man on the ground to report back. It was newsworthy stuff. The idea of a woman travelling alone without her husband was very shocking in those days, let alone one married into the royal family. Queen Mary, in particular, was furious at her behaviour, but Edwina delighted in shocking the establishment. She just wanted to do whatever she was told she shouldn't. Lady Mountbatten, it was said, collected lovers like others collected porcelain. Soon after her marriage, she indeed began taking other men into her confidence and her bed. Lord Louis, for his part, was either oblivious or, more likely, in denial for years, but by the early 1930s, scandal forced his hand. A certain Marjorie Hall Simpson filed for divorce, naming Edwina as the other woman in her marriage with Anthony Simpson. The case splashed Edwina's name across the press as a homewrecker, making it impossible for Dicky Mountbatten to pretend all was well. The confrontation between husband and wife was inevitable. Rather than break apart, though, the Mountbattens made a remarkable pact. They would quietly agree to an open marriage. Edwina could carry on as she pleased, and Dickie would tolerate her affairs, on the condition that she continued to fulfill her public duties as his spouse. In return, she would support his naval career and keep up appearances. It was an enlightened arrangement for its day, if also a tad one-sided at first. Once the rules were rewritten, Edwina's romantic life truly unfurled. According to Pamela, on one occasion, the household staff didn't even know where to deposit all of Edwina's gentleman callers. Upon Edwina's return home one day, a servant dutifully reported, "Mr. Larry Gray is in the drawing room, Mr. Sanford is in the library, Mr. Ted Phillips is in the boudoir, Senor Portago is in the anteroom, and I don't know what to do with Mr. Molyneux." Even in history's pages, such a scene reads like farce, a naughty French farce at that, but Lady Mountbatten lived it. Her appetites were the stuff of legend. She apparently settled on a roster of 18 lovers, and indeed Pamela herself dubbed her mother a man-eater. However, when Edwina's private escapades exploded into public view in 1932, common British people were outraged. She was seen as threatening the good name of the royal family. It all began with a salacious tidbit printed in the Sunday tabloid The People. The paper tantalized readers with talk of, quote, a scandal which has shaken society to the very depths. The anonymous article hinted that a society lady had been caught in so-called compromising circumstances with her black lover, and that the powers that be had quietly banished her abroad to let the furor die down. Mayfair gossips wasted no time in naming Edwina Mountbatten as the woman in question. When King George V himself saw the story, he was incensed. The notion that his cousin by marriage, Edwina, was cavorting with a black man was unacceptable. The king's outrage carried the day. He commanded that the Mountbattens return to London immediately from their overseas posting and sued the People for libel. Thus Edwina and Dickie were summoned home, both of them suddenly under intense pressure to defend the family honour. Cables from Buckingham Palace rained down upon the Mountbattens, Edwina wrote. A high-profile court battle was swiftly set in motion to quash the rumours. It was an extraordinary scene in the High Court that summer, an earth-shakingly intimate libel case so scandalous that they opened the courtroom doors early to avoid being swamped by reporters. The Lord Chief Justice agreed to hear their case almost in camera. Such was the pressure from on high to contain the fallout. Edwina took the stand and under oath coolly denied ever having so much as met the man the gossip pointed to, the famed black American singer and actor Paul Robeson. This was actually true. Robeson's own wife even confirmed the couple didn't even know Lady Mountbatten. The People, for its part, scrambled frantically to substantiate the story. The paper spent a staggering £25,000, an astronomical sum at the time, digging for evidence of a connection to Robeson, but came up empty. In the face of the Mountbattens' emphatic denials and the looming threat of royal retribution, the People caved. Its lawyer offered a grovelling apology in court. The judge awarded Edwina full costs. She pointedly declined any damages. By late morning, the case was over, successfully swept under the plush royal carpet. That evening, the Mountbattens celebrated with champagne at the Café de Paris. A day later, they lunched at Buckingham Palace as the King and Queen offered public support. The crisis was seemingly defused. But outside the courtroom, the question remained. If not Robeson, then who was Edwina's mysterious lover, the one whose name the tabloids dared not print? The answer was, in some ways, even more sensational than the Robeson rumours. Many years later, Edwina's secret beau was revealed as Leslie Hutch Hutchinson, a Caribbean-born cabaret star, renowned for his suave talent, velvet voice and, shall we say, generous physical endowments. He was also a black man in an era of unapologetic racism, a fact that only added to the transgressive thrill for Edwina. Edwina and Hutch's passion was intense, brazen, and nearly brought the house down. She allegedly lavished him with expensive keepsakes, a gold cigarette case, a monogrammed ring, a diamond watch. But the most outrageous claim was that Edwina had Cartier jewelers design a bespoke diamond-encrusted sheath for Hutch's penis, a rather decadent trinket to elevate their lovemaking. The most shocking tale of all alleged that one night Edwina and Hutch became physically stuck together during sex. This is a rare medical phenomenon called vaginismus, and it can actually happen. Although whether the addition of a diamond condom makes it more or less likely, I really don't know. They called servants for help, and this required them to be carried, still genitally entangled, from Edwina's own Brookhouse mansion to a private hospital to be separated by doctors. Could such things possibly be true? Well, Edwina's official biographer dismissed the stories as piffle and fantastical gossip, but many who knew the couple believed something extraordinary of that nature had occurred. Years later, a BBC producer who frequented society parties recalled Edwina's outrageous behaviour with Hutch at one soirée, how she boldly interrupted his piano performance to kiss his neck, then dragged him off into a dining room, emerging minutes later with her clothes visibly askew. Hutch returned to the piano, grinning like the cat who got the cream, bragging that with a single thrust he had just slid Lady Mountbatten clear down the length of the dining table. True or not, the point was that such anecdotes spread like wildfire through the gossip mill of the era and made Edwina into one of the most shocking figures in British history to that point. Among Edwina's many paramours, one finally captured her heart in a deeper way. Harold Bunny Phillips was a dashing Coldstream Guards officer, nearly a decade her junior. Edwina fell passionately in love with him in the late 1930s. So smitten was she that for a moment Lord Mountbatten even considered divorcing her so she might be with Bunny. In a bittersweet twist, Edwina herself arranged a suitable marriage for Bunny during the war, perhaps knowing she could never publicly have him. When Bunny did indeed become engaged in 1944, Edwina was nonetheless devastated. She refused to attend Bunny's wedding and even forbade her daughter Pamela from serving as a bridesmaid. It took Edwina 2 years to recover from that heartbreak. By the late 1930s, as storm clouds gathered over Europe, Edwina Mountbatten's life of ceaseless pleasure-seeking had begun to pall. The frenetic thrills, the high society dramas, all were about to be eclipsed by the greatest drama of the century, World War II. When war dawned in 1939, Edwina underwent a profound transformation. The notorious socialite re-emerged as a passionate humanitarian almost overnight. Edwina first leveraged her wealth and name to rally support for the war effort. She hosted fundraisers for the British Red Cross and used her transatlantic connections to thank American donors aiding Britain. In one 6-month span, she visited 28 US states, giving rousing speeches about British hospitals and relief work. In 1942, the authorities appointed her Superintendent-in-Chief of the St. John Ambulance Brigade. With that title, Lady Mountbatten donned a crisply starched uniform and got to work. She inspected first aid posts during the Blitz, descended into air raid shelters and underground stations to ensure the injured were tended, and organised ambulance training. Notably, Edwina, who had some Jewish ancestry through her grandfather, sent her daughters to safety in New York early in the war, fearing Nazi persecution should Britain fall. But Edwina herself stayed put in Britain and worked. After VE Day, she immediately set off for Southeast Asia, where British POWs were being freed from Japanese camps. The supreme Allied commander in the region happened to be Lord Louis Mountbatten, by then Admiral Mountbatten, but Edwina carved out her own role. She personally helped oversee the repatriation of some 90,000 former prisoners of war from Burma, Malaya and Singapore. Lady Mountbatten flew more than 33,000 miles across jungles and tropics, visiting makeshift hospitals teeming with gaunt, malaria-stricken soldiers, ensuring they received care. She was often the only woman for hundreds of miles, trudging through mud, comforting the sick and dying. World War II had remade Edwina's public image. By 1945, she was no longer primarily viewed as the scandalous party girl countess, and for the first time in her life, Edwina herself felt a sense of fulfillment beyond the thrill of the chase. As the post-war dust settled, a new chapter opened for the Mountbattens, one that would test Edwina's newfound sense of duty on the world stage. In early 1947, Prime Minister Clement Attlee appointed Lord Louis Mountbatten as the last Viceroy of British India, tasking him with overseeing India's imminent independence. It was a crown of thorns. The British Raj was ending in chaos, with tensions between Hindus and Muslims threatening to tear the subcontinent apart. Unofficially, Edwina would find in India not only a humanitarian cause amid the carnage of partition, but also the deepest emotional connection of her life. In the spring of 1947, Lady Mountbatten met Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the leaders of India's freedom movement. Their first significant time together came during an informal weekend retreat at the Mountbatten's lodge in the hills of Simla. Nehru arrived wary. He had spent his life fighting against all that the Mountbattens, as viceroys, represented. But soon he relaxed in the company of the charming Edwina and the affable Dicky. The trio picnicked in orchards and hiked mountain paths. Edwina and Nehru bonded over a shared love of nature and literature. Nehru taught them how to walk backwards up slopes to rest their leg muscles. It was during this same weekend, in a curious intertwining of the personal and political, that Lord Mountbatten decided to break protocol and share his confidential partition plan with Nehru. Nehru reacted angrily to the plan's contents. Mountbatten then revised the plan with Nehru's input, leading to an arrangement more acceptable to Indian leaders, albeit one that still turned into a total cock-up, to put it mildly. The partition of India in August 1947 unleashed one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 20th century. Sectarian violence flared. Millions of refugees fled across new borders. Lady Mountbatten once again found herself finding her cause amidst suffering. She toured refugee camps, comforted rape victims and orphaned children, and marshalled relief efforts with the same fervour she'd shown in wartime Europe. She did not flinch from the horrors she witnessed, which won her genuine respect from Indians of all communities. The Prime Minister of the new Pakistan, Liaquat Ali Khan, even commended Edwina's efforts, despite her closeness with his rival Nehru, for alleviating the refugee crisis on both sides of the border. Nehru, a charismatic Cambridge-educated intellectual who had spent years in British jails for fighting colonial rule, found in Edwina a sympathetic ear and a kindred spirit. After Mahatma Gandhi's assassination in January 1948, Edwina rushed to console Nehru. At Gandhi's funeral, the Viceroy's elegant wife sat right beside a grief-stricken Nehru, holding his hand as he silently wept. It was no secret to those close to them that Edwina and Jawahar, as she called him, had fallen in love. When Lord Mountbatten's tenure in India ended in June 1948, Edwina bade farewell to Nehru with a heavy heart. Back in England, Edwina resumed her charitable activities and Dicky moved on to new military postings. Yet Edwina and Nehru refused to lose each other. They began a voluminous correspondence, writing long, soulful letters across continents. From 1948 until Edwina's death in 1960, scarcely a week went by without a letter or two. On rare occasions, they did meet again in person. Edwina visited India periodically as an honoured guest of Nehru's government. He famously kept a photograph of Edwina on his bedside table. She in turn carried with her a portrait of Nehru in a silver frame. By the 1950s, Edwina Mountbatten had largely withdrawn from the social whirlwind that once defined her. She still travelled incessantly, now to attend conferences on leprosy in Burma or to advise hospitals in Africa. In February 1960, Edwina Mountbatten embarked on yet another far-flung tour, this time to Borneo in Southeast Asia, to inspect local branches of St. John Ambulance and visit a British garrison. Though just 58, she had lived several lifetimes worth of adventure, and her health was not what it once was. Perhaps the years of ceaseless motion finally caught up to her in the steamy jungles of North Borneo. On the night of February 20th, 1960, Edwina retired to bed in the governor's residence in Jesselton, modern Kota Kinabalu, complaining of her headache. She was found the next morning dead, having passed in her sleep. The cause was never conclusively determined, although it was possibly heart failure. In line with her being married to an admiral, Edwina had requested burial at sea, a fact which led to one of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's most notorious pieces of wit, when she allegedly remarked, "Dear Edwina, she always liked to make a splash." True to her wishes, Edwina's body was flown back to England and placed aboard HMS Wakeful. Jawaharlal Nehru, grief-stricken in New Delhi, had also dispatched the Indian Navy ship INS Trishul to escort Wakeful at sea and to cast a wreath upon the waters for Edwina. Edwina Mountbatten's story is one that is both glitter and grit, and it shows that even a wild child can come good in the end. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this second episode. Leave me a comment and let me know who you'd like to see me cover. I've been Chester. Thanks for tuning into Society Mysteries. See you next time. Cheers.